Let's bring in Michael Singh. He's managing director of the Washington Institute, formerly senior director of Middle Eastern Affairs at the National Security Council. And Michael, you have some questions about this diplomatic resolution that seems to be emerging. What's the biggest question of them all?
Well, I think, Jenna, the question now is, where does President Obama go from here? I mean, this is, I think, safe to say, a sort of ploy by the Russians to save Assad. This is something similar to what they did before both Gulf Wars, for example. But obviously, President Obama faces a very different situation than his predecessors faced in those situations, because he had very little domestic or international support for what he was proposing. And so this, in a sense, offers him what must seem in the White House like a godsend. But the question now is, what will he do next?
Is America safe if Assad remains in power through all of this?
Well, I think that that's one of the key questions, Jenna, about this proposal. You know, the proposal is wildly impractical on its face. The idea of identifying Syria's chemical weapons and destroying them amidst a civil war, but even more fundamentally, it really only addresses one single element of this conflict, the use of chemical weapons. And there are many more things about this conflict, Jenna, which have threatened U.S. national security: the destabilization of the Middle East, all the refugees which it has produced and which have placed an economic and security strain on our allies, as well as a potential sort of civil war in Lebanon and the involvement of Iran and Hezbollah. And
there has been that argument, and the Wall Street Journal has an editorial on this today from the editorial board, an argument from some conservatives to say, yeah, leave Assad in power. This is Iran's Vietnam War. It will only weaken Iran, and we should just let the war continue. I mean, very few will come out and say it that plainly. The Wall Street Journal disagrees with that, Michael, but what do you think?
I think that's terribly misguided because, you know, Iran has made a deep investment in saving Assad here. It's not something that's draining Iran's economy. It's not an investment of that scale. This is sort of providing advisors, training militias, providing some strategic weaponry and so forth. But if Iran is able to do this without being challenged, without being confronted, I think this will really embolden Iran and Hezbollah to think that they can do more things in the region with impunity. So the idea that we simply allow Iran and Hezbollah and its other proxies to do this without any challenge, I think, would pose real problems for our policy in the region.
How do we confront them without military action?
Well, look, I think it's very hard. I think that the idea that the Obama administration has put forward that all of this is happening because we had a credible threat of military action is wrong. I don't think that threat was credible because of the defeat that was looming in Congress. But I think that having that credible threat is important, and that's why I think that President Obama should still go to Congress and say, give me authorization if this diplomacy now fails. But I think that without some element of force here, without some element of threat, I think it'll be very hard to get Assad or the Iranians to cooperate.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I only have about 30 seconds here, but we're hearing murmurs that there will be some sort of deadline set. For example, the Congress could approve something to say, okay, we'll work through the UN, but you have 10 days or you have 30 days. And I'm just picking those numbers out of the air. We don't know what the timeline would be, Michael, but what would be a timeline that you could consider effective to say we gave this diplomatic channel a chance and now we are moving to military intervention?
Well, I think you could have a timeline, Jenna, for Syria accepting a plan or a resolution, but the timeline for actually destroying the chemical weapons, I think, is very hard to pin down. It could take a very long time. I think much more important is the scope of the resolution. It has to say more than just destroy chemical weapons. It has to have some prospect of resolving the underlying conflict. Otherwise, frankly, it won't really improve our situation in the Middle East.
Something to watch. Michael, as always, thank you for your expertise. We appreciate it.